The journey through Philippians chapter 2 is one of ascending to celestial peaks where Christ's supremacy is unchallenged, before descending into the valley where Christian life is lived out in the shadow of such grandeur. The Apostle Paul, with the inspired pen of a seasoned theologian and the heart of a shepherd, presents an extraordinary contrast. At one moment, he portrays the humility of Christ, who, though being in very nature God, emptied himself to assume the form of a servant. At the next, he unveils the splendor of Christ's exaltation, a truth so overwhelming that it commands a universal submission and declaration of Jesus as Lord, to the glory of God the Father. This is the summit of divine revelation and the basis for Christian confession. Verses 9 to 11 do not merely depict Christ's return to glory, but announce the irreversible establishment of his kingdom. Every knee bowing, every tongue confessing, speaks of a reality where Christ's lordship is acknowledged by all creation, in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. Such is the doctrine that rattles the very foundations of the cosmos. Such is the truth that should rattle the complacency out of every believer. It is from this high theological crest that Paul transitions us, without losing sight of the majestic Christ, into the practical outworking of our faith. The segue into verses 12 and 13 is skillfully crafted, not as an abrupt change in topic, but as a seamless continuation of thought. Paul insists that the very nature of Christ's exaltation demands a response from those who call him Lord. This response is not static, it is active and dynamic, a call to live in a manner worthy of the gospel that has been professed. Thus, as we approach the exposition of Philippians chapter 2, verses 12 through 13, we do so with a profound sense of continuity. We are called to live out the implications of Christ's lordship in every aspect of our lives. The towering truth of Christ's exaltation becomes the driving force behind every act of obedience and service. The splendor of Christ's majesty is not just a doctrine to be admired, but a reality to be lived out on the canvas of everyday Christian life. With this perspective, let us delve into the apostolic exhortation that follows, one that invites us to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, yet ever mindful that it is God who works in us both to will and to act according to his good purpose. In verse 12, we read, "Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now, much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling." This verse unfolds with "therefore," a term of consequence that bridges the theological expanse of Christ's lordship with the practical expanse of Christian living. The Philippians are addressed as "my beloved," a phrase that is drenched in affection, but also laden with responsibility. Paul's appeal to them is rooted in a relationship forged in the fires of shared faith and struggle. His use of "always obeyed" acknowledges their historical faithfulness, a commendation, but also a setup for the greater challenge he is about to lay before them. The contrast between "in my presence" and "now much more in my absence" is striking. Paul underscores a pivotal truth about Christian obedience. It is not merely for the eyes of human accountability. True obedience does not fluctuate with circumstances. It is consistent, resilient, and anchored in the unseen presence of the Lord. The absence of the apostle should amplify their efforts, not diminish them, for their ultimate service is to Christ, not to Paul. Now comes the heart of the matter. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. The verb work out carries the meaning of bringing something to completion or fullness. It does not imply that salvation is earned by effort, but rather that it should be expressed and experienced in its full depth and practical implications. Paul is not advocating for a salvation by works, but a salvation that works, evidenced in behavior, choices, and a lifestyle that aligns with the gospel they profess. The phrase, "with fear and trembling," is not a call to anxiety or dread, but to a reverence and humility that recognizes both the cost at which salvation was purchased and the holy God we serve. This is not about the terror of a slave before a master, but the awe-inspired respect of a child in the presence of a loving yet infinitely majestic parent. This fear is not one that paralyzes. Instead, it mobilizes believers toward a holy pursuit of living out their salvation. The concept of your own salvation is personal and individual. While salvation is a corporate reality shared among all believers, its outworking is a deeply personal endeavor. Each believer is to take ownership of their faith, not leaning on the spiritual maturity or fervor of others. The Christian faith, while profoundly communal, is also intensely individual in its application. Everyone must bear their own torch, display their own light, and walk their own path of sanctification. In summary, verse 12 calls believers to a robust, active pursuit of holiness that is grounded in a community of faith, yet marked by individual responsibility. It is an obedience that reverberates with the implications of Christ's lordship, reverberates within the chamber of the believer's heart, and reverberates throughout the fabric of their daily life. The work of salvation, wrought by Christ on the cross, demands nothing less than a life lived in reverent awe and earnest diligence. In verse 13 we read, "For it is God who works in you both to will and to do for his good pleasure." This verse serves as a divine counterbalance to the human responsibility laid out in verse 12. It begins with the conjunction for, signifying explanation and grounding the believer's work in divine initiative. The heart of the message here is about the origin of true spiritual energy and effectiveness. It is God who works in you. This is the sovereign operation of God within the believer, a profound mystery and a deep comfort. It is He who activates and energizes the will and action according to His purposes. The phrase, "works in you," implies an intimate, ongoing, internal, divine action. God is at work within the very core of our being, our desires, motivations, and choices. This work is not peripheral, it is central, not external, but internal. The Greek word translated as works is energeo, from which we derive the English word energy. This choice of word communicates a dynamic and powerful operation. It is the same power that raised Christ from the dead, Ephesians 1 verses 19 through 20, now active in every believer. Furthermore, God's work in us encompasses both to will and to do. This means that God is not only prompting our desire to act according to His will, but also empowering the very actions themselves. The will involves our inner inclinations, decisions, and intentions, while the do refers to the resultant actions, behaviors, and conduct. There is an entire alignment of the inner person with the outer actions that is crafted and sustained by God. The purpose of God's working in the believer is for His good pleasure. This phrase captures the delightful truth that God's work in us is not arbitrary or coerced. It flows from His own good pleasure, His kind intention, and His benevolent will. It pleases God to work in His children, shaping them into the image of Christ. Romans 8 verse 29. This is the ultimate end of all God's works, not merely the redemption of humanity, but the satisfaction of His own righteous and loving nature. Understanding that it is God who works in us to will and to do reshapes our view of sanctification. It is not a grim, self-powered struggle, but a grace-empowered partnership with the divine. It does not rob us of responsibility, rather it provides the only true foundation upon which our efforts can rest and flourish. We are not left to our own devices and power, which would invariably lead to failure, but are infused with divine strength for the task at hand. This truth should instill a sense of humble dependence and godly confidence in the believer. We are not to be passive, but actively reliant on the Spirit's work within us, cooperating with His promptings and relying on His power. The mystery of sanctification is that while we work out our salvation, it is ultimately God's work within us that achieves His purposes. Thus, we strive in our Christian walk not as those who must generate their own spiritual vitality, but as those who are moved by the very Spirit of God towards obedience that satisfies the heart of the Father. The exhortation of Philippians, chapter 2, verse 12 through 13, stands as a dual testament to the profound interplay of divine sovereignty and human responsibility in the life of a believer. These verses, nestled in the rich theological tapestry of Paul's letter, demand a response that resonates with both the gravity and the grace encapsulated in the gospel of Jesus Christ. The journey of sanctification to which believers are called is one that begins at the foot of the cross and continues each day against the backdrop of the empty tomb. It is a path marked by conscious effort, deliberate obedience, and an ever-deepening reverence for God. Yet it is not a path walked in human strength or wisdom. The believer is accompanied at every step by the indwelling presence of the Spirit, who provides the necessary power and desire to live a life worthy of the calling received. The gospel message echoed through these verses is clear. Salvation, from its inception to its consummation, is a work of God. In Christ, believers find the archetype of obedience that leads to exaltation, and in their own lives, they find the grace-enabled capacity to follow in His footsteps. The good news of Jesus does more than offer a ticket to eternity. It transforms the present, empowering believers to live out a salvation that is already secured, yet being realized in daily experience. This realization brings a profound humility, knowing that every effort made is fueled by divine power, and every victory won is a reflection of divine grace. Yet, it also instills a sacred confidence, for the omnipotent God who commands the stars in their courses is intimately involved in the refining of every believing heart. He is at work, conforming His children to the likeness of His Son for His ultimate glory and their ultimate good. Believers, then, are to live with a profound tension, working as if all depends on them, yet knowing all depends on God. This tension is not a cause for anxiety, but a catalyst for faith and diligence. As they walk in obedience, believers demonstrate the transformative power of the gospel, a power that does not leave them as orphans in the struggle against sin, but adopts them as sons and daughters, empowering them to overcome. In this divine economy, the seemingly ordinary acts of daily faithfulness become sacred offerings, pleasing to God and reflective of His work within. The mundane is sanctified, the trivial is imbued with eternal significance, and the act of living out one's faith becomes a testament to the gospel itself. Therefore, let the truth of Christ's lordship and the assurance of God's working within shape life's every moment. For in this sacred synergy of divine and human effort, the life of the believer becomes a canvas upon which the grace of the gospel is vividly portrayed, a life that is both a living sacrifice and a living testimony to the power and goodness of God. Thank you for tuning in to Gospel Illuminations. We appreciate your time and your commitment to growing in faith through our content. If you found this video valuable and insightful, we kindly ask that you please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and fellow believers, and subscribe to Gospel Illuminations. Your support helps us continue to bring you biblically grounded content and spread the message of God's grace and truth.